There's enough uncertainty to go around.
Your protection from deception. This is Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Kathryn Andries.
Join us each week as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose. You'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Welcome to Spirit's Journey. We are coming to you live today on Truth Frequency Radio and being simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio, among others. Some of those are iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and TalkStream Live. We're here in the Heartland, holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Kathryn. Welcome, everyone. Well, today I'm excited. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite things, astrology, with world-renowned astrologer Elizabeth Cutting. She not only is an astrologer, she is also a writer, consultant, and seminar producer. She received her MBA from Northwestern University. She is the past president of the Aquarian Organization of Astrologers, and she studied with many top national astrologers. She served on the boards of several professional organizations. She has 20 years experience as a marketing executive. She's written numerous articles. You can find her in places such as the Yoga Journal, and working along with corporate clients in business development. She also presents seminars in astrology, conscious language, wild food foraging, and Sanskrit mantras. Elizabeth has presented at such places as the EPA, the Omega Institute, Monsanto, and Ford Motor Company. She hosts spiritually oriented workshops from national and international presenters. Just to give you her contact information now, because after you hear her show today, I know you're going to want to get in touch with her. Her email is eacutting@aol.com, and her phone number is 816-590-5955. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hey, good to talk to you.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this show because there are some very unusual things happening, and I'm sure that the astrological perspective can give us a little bit of insight on that. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, so...
go ahead.
Yeah, so let's begin and jump right in, Elizabeth. I know a lot of people are looking to astrology to explain the current events with the COVID virus and so forth. And so I thought this would be a good place to start. What are some of the major astrological, conjunctions, events going on today that explain this crazy world we're living in?
Well, the thing that I think is the number one is a Pluto-Saturn conjunction. And it happens roughly every 35, 38 years. So it was at the beginning of World War I and the end of World War II and other times like that. But this is a particularly challenging one because there's a lot of other planets involved this time. And we've been talking about it. I've read an article where some people say they've been wondering for 10 years how it was going to play out. But in my world, we've been doing projections for the last couple of years thinking, wow, this is really, really intense. Now, I don't know that we would have exactly predicted what's going on with COVID, but you knew it was going to be a big, huge, challenging deal. And so it's interesting just to look and see how it's playing out.
Yes. And so maybe, for listeners who aren't as good at astrology or familiar with it, how do these, tell us a little about Saturn and Pluto and the conjunction, which means they touch, they get together. How does that change the energies of both of those planets?
Well, I used to write weekly or, monthly column. And what you do if you're predicting is you look and you see what the big, and we call them events of the year are, or if it's a shorter term thing, the events of the month or something. But each of the planets has a certain cycle, and we're familiar with the sun and the moon. The sun has a 1-year cycle that goes around through the whole, and the moon goes around once a month. And when in the ancient world they said there were 7 planets, Saturn was the outermost planet, and it has a very regular 29-year cycle. And so every 29 years, it comes back to its own place. And over the course of that cycle, it's going to touch in every different varied way everything else in the chart and the stars. And in the meantime, when I was young, we were taught there were 10 planets. Now, the sun is a star, not a planet, and the moon is a satellite of the Earth. And since then, Pluto has been demoted to a dwarf planet, whereas other things have been promoted to a dwarf planet. But at any rate, Pluto has close to a 248-year cycle. And where Saturn is very regular, Pluto is not. Anyway, that was also, they at different times have both been the outer reaches of our personal solar system and have been called the Lord of Death. Now, there are other things, and it doesn't always mean that, although, it can mean end. But they're kind of, and this is simplistic, but they're kind of the big bad boys of the astrology chart, of the, configuration that we look at. And when they come together, it really symbolizes endings. It symbolizes change. And it can be as simple as at 29 years, it's kind of an astrological grow-up time. And I was talking to somebody earlier and was talking about Saturn can really represent our outer world. What's our work life like? How do we handle responsibilities? What's the authority that we deal with? Whereas Pluto is the god of the underworld, also known as Hades, not the planet, but the myth, can either be Pluto or Hades, god of the underworld. So it can represent our unconscious, those things that are hidden powers. Each sign or each planet is associated with a sign, and Saturn is associated with the sign of Capricorn, which tends to be mature and responsible, and they reward the things of the earth. They reward people that do what they're supposed to do, that work hard, show up when they're supposed to show up, tend to what needs to be tended to. Whereas Pluto is a sign that is associated with Scorpio. And often it's the more hidden emotional things, and it can be very passionate, but it also can be very shrewd and looking underneath things. And a lot of times Pluto gets a bad rap because it's like, oh my God, you're having a Pluto transit, and somebody. Sometimes you try not to lead with, oh my God, what's going on in your life? Because I've heard some horribly difficult stories about people who are having Pluto transits. It really tests ourselves on all sorts of different levels. So when those two come together, you look at history, and there's been very difficult and very challenging things. Of course, in an individual chart, it means, is it really at a prominent place in your chart when those things come together? But globally, it also affects us all. And so we've been sitting around, at different meetings and different articles pondering, how is this going to play out? And I think this is a deeply, deeply challenging time for us globally. And it definitely represents needing to let go of systems that no longer serve us, and being able to look at the hidden things, where there's shadowy aspects of things. Everything has a light and a shadow, and I really try and express the hope is that we will become more conscious as individuals and collectively, and really can make wonderful things happen. But, kind of in the lemonade thing, it takes a lot sometimes to look at something very difficult and think, what is the good? What's the good that will come out of this?
So it's interesting because this event obviously means something significant is happening. We know it can go either way. So we know something about what has happened up to this point based on these influences. So looking at what has happened at this point, what are some predictions about how this may play out? And then also, and I personally think most importantly, what are some things we can do collectively to help ensure that this actually has a really positive outcome for everybody?
Well, in some ways, it's really hard to predict exactly how it's going to go. But I will say that you can say this both because you know about life cycles of viruses, but you also know, looking at some of the things coming up through the years, a lot of people are wanting to get back to work in the next couple of weeks. And really, this is going to be going on. There's some version of it. There are some people that have been working all along. Some people are doing, fabulous during this time. I talked to one store owner who said, they're doing 4 times their normal business, except that they're kind of in the firing line. So there's some people doing great during this, but a lot of people are really struggling, and there continues to be a bunch of other transits through the end of the year. Last year, when we were doing predictions, we said, the real message isn't this year, it's next year, but we're leading up to it at that point. But one thing is looking at the elections in this country. Towards the end of this year, there is a Jupiter Saturn conjunction, which is a very regular thing. It happens every 20 years, and it's kind of the even years, 40, 60, 80, 2000, and now 2020, those two planets come together and it changes. But we've had some very difficult things happen with the presidential elections, the people in those particular times. And so we're watching very closely to see what happens with that. I think in the long run, the biggest lesson is looking at systems that don't work. And this certainly can be in private lives. But for instance, America outsourcing all of its production, and then all of a sudden we have a crisis, we don't have a way of manufacturing and responding. I've heard people talking that the United States for a long time was the white knight. If there was a problem, we'd run in and save things. Now, sometimes that was from our perspective, not necessarily everybody else's, but it's kind of like if we're in trouble, there's nobody out there to run in and save us. So what are the systems that we have in place that we don't have in place that need to make us stronger, that make us more sustainable? Are there things, Kathryn, you were taught, I know you think about a lot of things like that. Do you have any thoughts yourself on some of the changes you think need to be coming forward?
Well, definitely. I mean, because this is a health-related issue, I think one of the biggest systems is the health system. It is focused on pharmaceuticals. We can go back to the 1900s when Rockefeller decided to start his pharma cartel, so to speak. And back in like 1913, he diverted all his business and everything under so-called philanthropic umbrella, which was really his pharmaceutical industry. And at that point, everything that was natural, focused, vitamins, herbs, and all that, he wanted to overtake and wanted everything to be pharmaceutical. And so that was the direction that the United States went. I think it even started way back before him, when homeopathic schools were being shut down right and left by the American Medical Association because they didn't want that kind of medicine practiced. So I think there has been a long line of corruption, patriarchal influence in the medical system. Look at the birthing process for women. I mean, it's been horrible, right? Because it's been a patriarchal approach to childbirth as opposed to the natural midwifery, which was practiced. So for me, I think that is one of the biggest institutions that needs to change. Now, going along with that, one point I wanted to bring up is, Pluto is kind of a radical planet, and it says, let's wipe the slate clean in order to start fresh. It doesn't do anything halfway. And so what happens when, these systems that are corrupt that need to be changed, but those in power do not want to let it go? So, those of us who are into astrology know that with Pluto, the more that you try to hold on, the worse it gets. Life becomes miserable. Like, let's say on a personal level, Pluto's moving through your house of career, and you know that you've needed to leave a certain career for many years, but you haven't, and you're holding on to it. Pluto will make it very difficult in your career for you to stay there, make it very uncomfortable. And so what I'm looking at, and I'm curious your perspective on this, Elizabeth, as all these people in power who are entrenched in the medical system, we'll just use that example since I brought that up, are trying to hold on to, a pharmaceutical-based approach to everything, cutting out all alternative therapies. What is this, this struggle? Because we're fighting against $1 billion pharmaceutical, industry, the Western medicine that's been entrenched, and they're holding on to that. But there's so many of us that say, no, we want more choice in our healthcare. We don't want mandates. How do you see that?
Well, for one thing, I think Paul is towards balance. Like when you bring up childbirth, the thing of it is there are many good things. Like if somebody, needs an emergency C-section, to be in a hospital where you can get that can certainly be a good thing. But then most of it, but also to make it more humane and loving and less clinical for the average person, it's more about finding some balance where you get the best of both worlds. But what Pluto can do, it's not just make it challenging. It can go from, I sometimes say, the still small voices and the little clues that I think is the great thing for each of us individually to listen to about where are the little clues. I know I had a little incident the other day that something said, oh, hey, you ought to do that. And I was in a hurry and didn't pay attention, and life will go on, but it would have been better for me to listen to the message that came through. And it was definitely a reminder for me to take that time to listen to the still small voices, to be tuned in. And I think we live in a world where people don't have time or feel like they've got the power to listen to somebody saying, your inner voice is saying, I need to be quiet today, or you need to take some time to be creative, or go do this, that you just need to, the human body doesn't go on a 9-to-5 rhythm Monday through Friday. It's a little more varied. But it can start with the still small voices and accelerate to things happening. You will see things happening to people about you, and then it starts to get to be your own health, your own job, your own whatever. And I got to say, this global pandemic is a big, huge global deal where we're really seeing, my God, no matter what you think, you see how profoundly we're connected, that in a matter of days or weeks, something can just travel around the world so quickly. And hopefully what they're doing, I do hope that some people that really care talk about the social distancing. And even though there's great cost to it, and a lot of us don't like being distant from, other people, but hopefully it's doing what it needs to do, not just so that the hospitals don't get overwhelmed, but which I think, to be honest, sometimes in my most disappointed state, I think they were more concerned about the hospital system than the individuals. But, that is not an overly safe thing to say. But hopefully there's people that really were behind the deal thinking this is the only way to beat this. But it certainly has got everyone's attention. And I think one of the lessons we can take personally is where, if we have a message that there's something we need to do, if you're somebody that wants to work on the environment, if you're somebody that wants to see changes, there's whole generations of kids coming to age that have different conjunctions, not this Pluto Saturn one, but there's other planets that come together, and there's whole generations that can look back and think, wait a minute, I don't like the way this has been offering. And people of that generation are the ones that are the voices of change, the voices that say something. And, Kathryn, I think you're somebody that has a big voice in certain things, and people like you and others who, whether you you usually get the clue inside, and I think astrology can confirm and direct. But I think it's important for each of us to really listen to say, how can I adjust my life based on what's going on? And it's in an evolved spiritual manner. It's never getting more angry and hoarding and unless it's using anger in a healthy way to motivate you to act, in your most courageous effective self. But what are those calls that we get from within that each of us can respond to individually? But I think collectively, there are a lot of systems that are not sustainable, that do not keep the good of all in mind. And that is, in an extreme, something at the shadow of the patriarchy, where it's gotten too powerful and too greedy and not concerned enough for the good of all. And the balance of that wisdom that comes from being in touch with the earth, being in touch with your soul, living in harmony with nature, not trying to have dominion over nature. And where are the ways that we can change things little by little? And there's stuff going on now, and there's been stuff going on for years that support that.
Well, Salamo in our chat room made a comment about how we're fighting against our programming. I think that is really a big part of this, because one actually good thing that I think is coming out of this is that we're able to step away from our hectic lives. We're usually just so busy with our heads down and everything that we have to do, going from one thing to another without really stopping to think about our life and the bigger pictures. I think it just gives us a little bit of an in-breath. Maybe globally, we were just so frantic in our lives that we needed to just take an in-breath. So everybody just kind of paused for a moment. It gives us a little time for introspection. And you have talked about how the Saturn Pluto is challenging authority and bringing up issues of shadow power and things like that, outdated structures. So how is the Saturn Pluto working with this time where we're just kind of having this pause, and how can people better make use of this time that they have?
Well, one of the answers, I have read things either online or in emails that different people have sent around. And I find it interesting that the environment responded so quickly. Now, I don't know what the facts are. Sometimes, you see things on social media and, you could do some fact checking, but it looks like somebody had said, I think it was LA, but if it wasn't, it was some other big city before this started, a week later. And 2 weeks later, it went from overcast and smog and pollution to beautiful blue skies. And there's stories of rivers where, because there's less activity on these well-traveled waterways, that the wildlife, the fish and the dolphins are, in the cleaner water are coming, and, almost immediate response to things like that. And one lovely friend of mine who I think is a very conscious, well-meaning person, but she's been home with her kids more often and was talking about really taking time that she just never felt like she had, and said, I think I need to take some of the lessons of this downtime and carry it into my regular life. Take time, where we really have time to just be together and really appreciate each other. That's one answer. The fact is, the beauty of doing astrology charts is it's different for everybody. There might be some people that collect, like, I care about this, and here's 10 other people or a million other people that care about the same thing, and let's get together on that. But I think the important thing individually is to listen to what your own message is.
I love that, Elizabeth, because, we can look at astrology globally and see, well, there may be a collective lesson, but individually we have different lessons. And of course, my Saturn Pluto, right, is on my midheaven relating to my career. So this is a time in a way that I'm slowing down, but at the same time, focusing on an aspect of my career, which I have not really put as much attention on. So that is a different lesson for me than for others. And I know the finances, the economics of this impact are something that a lot of people are wondering about. So we're almost up to the bottom of the hour. We're going to head into this topic in the second half of the show, but I want to bring up the fact that Jupiter, the planet of abundance, right, is conjuncting Pluto. And interestingly enough, an important person in the financial world, Warren Buffett, on his personal astrology chart, he has this Jupiter conjunct Pluto on his chart, which can indicate great wealth. So interestingly enough, now, even though we're seeing, huge unemployment and difficulties with the economics, the Pluto conjunct Jupiter could, for some people, mean great abundance. So we'll delve into that in the second half of the show. But before we do that, if people do want individual readings, Elizabeth, why don't you tell them how they can get in touch with you?
Well, my cell number is 816-590-5955. Again, 816-590-5955. You can text or you can leave a message and I'll call back because I'm often on, another call. And you can also email me at eacutting@aol.com. And if you're on Facebook, I'm just there under my name, Elizabeth Cutting.
Awesome. And the other thing, too, that we have to delve into with the economy, Elizabeth, is we know that the planet Uranus, which is about change, upheaval, sudden unexpected things, is in the sign of Taurus. Well, Taurus rules finances. So it's no surprise in my mind that we've had huge ups and downs recently in the stock market because of all this. And from my perspective, I don't know if you want to chime in the second half, but I think that the economic ups and downs are going to continue as long as Uranus is in Taurus.
Well, okay, and I will talk about that when we get back.
Yeah, well, it looks like we are at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to be going into a short break. So there will be a news and sponsor break here for about the next 3 minutes. You are listening to Spirit's Journey on Truth Frequency Radio, also being simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio, and we will see you on the other side.
You are now tuned into the Truth Frequency.
Your protection from deception. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Frequency Radio, being simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Today we are here with special guest Elizabeth Cutting, who's an astrologer, talking about some of the world events and especially how these events relate to the astrological influences. Welcome back to the second half.
So, Elizabeth, let's delve into the finances. And what do you want to share about, the Uranus and Taurus affecting the finances, the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, and what do you see financially going on?
Well, first of all, Uranus in and of itself is a planet that can represent, it can be at its best individuation, but it also can be like chaos and the unexpected. And I really think a lot of things that are going on right now, you sit around thinking, could it be this? Could it be that? Could it be, but the level of disruption going on at the moment is, I think it was hard to predict on this. But for everyone that has trouble, there's other people that benefit. There's always winners and losers and everything. And I think one of the big challenges with Taurus, it does represent money and it does represent the earth. It also represents the voice and what you have to say about things. And so I think this is a time about people speaking their truth. But I know one of the things that I found out in the ups and downs of life is that we tend to go through difficult times. And I don't know that would be a popular thing right now, because it's a lot more popular to say, oh, this is awful, only bad things are happening. But in reality, we just don't know how many ways we can handle money, as you call it, or finances, or value, or worth, or security in a lot of different ways. And personally, I think we need to really be opening to listening to our own truth about what's the way I need to handle it. And the truth is, people have kind of looked to the stock market as security. You know, we've had terms like the almighty dollar. That might change, but still, we need to know that we can find ways to be abundant, to be taken care of. Does that resonate with anything what do you think?
Well, I agree. And I'm also always curious and interested when really, like what you said, some people are winners, some are losers. And with the money, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of, Einstein's quote about energy. It can't be created or destroyed. It just changes form. Well, I see that with money where, we're like, oh my gosh, there's, economic losses. There are. But really, the money I see is just shifting its emphasis. So like people who are in the teleconferencing business, booming, right? Everybody's buying Zoom programs and stuff. People who work in the business of building respirators, right? They're booming. Pharmaceutical company, unfortunately, is probably booming as they're being paid billions to devise new things to deal with this virus, hospitals and so forth. The losers are restaurants. The service-oriented thing. So it's not that money's disappearing. It's just kind of shifting from one area to the other. And I think with Uranus and Taurus and the disruptions in the food chain and all that, I think farmers and farms, we can really look again at not only, the fact that we've shipped a lot of our manufacturing off to China, but the fact that, we need to focus again on small farms. So like in each community, if we had support and if we support small local farmers, always have a food supply.
Yeah. And from my perspective, too, there's actually a comment on our chat room, and it brings up a good point that I want to share here, too. Salamo mentioned that he's been busier for the last month, and I found myself a lot busier. Kathryn talked about taking time to work on some projects that have been kind of on the back burner. And I've been seeing an interesting mix of people. Some people are just kind of taking this time completely off. I think that can be good in some ways because people are spending more time with their kids, where everybody might be going in different directions so much that families can actually spend more time together. But I'm finding that in our business, we are fortunate that a lot of our business is online. So we've been getting busy because in the first week of this or so, everything that we had scheduled between now and the end of August was either canceled or rescheduled starting in September, going into October and even beyond. So everything just kind of vanished, like evaporated within the period of about a week. So we got busy and just started shifting our emphasis, our direction, since everything, things are going online, that's where we started giving our attention. So in a way, it's like we've had a lot of time together as a family, but it's been a super busy period as well. So it's kind of interesting, when you're talking about winners and losers, I think it depends on how we focus our attention, depending on, what kind of outcome we end up with.
One of the things that, and I know I'm going back to Saturn, but it represents a kind of security. And one of the things when we look forward, like I have certainly heard some predictions that there could be a second wave of this virus in October when it gets cold again, that the virus, this particular one, is not happy with heat. And so sometimes under certain sunlight, heat things, it's not as bad. Although I'm not saying that's definitive. It's just what some people have said. But it looks like there could be another wave in the fall. And then there's certain things going on towards the end of the year. And I think we need to be prepared to be flexible, prepared to do things differently. One story I've been telling people, my parents are both having their 85th birthday this year. And, they're definitely, along with other things, my father is in a very high risk category. Well, I called the other day and my sister answered the phone and said, "Oh, I haven't seen Mom for a few hours." And I panicked, could something have happened between last night? Was, she should be around by now. And I'd already tried her cell and didn't get through. And an hour later, she did call and she was fine. But my 85-year-old mother said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was on a Zoom meeting and I couldn't take the call." I'm like, you just don't. it's like I've never heard her say anything like that in my life. But, there are some activities she keeps up, and it had gone to Zoom, and there she was, and she's ahead of me on the Zoom meeting thing. And I think there's just a lot of things that people are just doing. You don't like that you can't get together with family, but it's one of the times that really it's a sign of love to know this is an invisible, well, I'm going to use some wild terms. It's an invisible demon that we're facing. So you have to be careful about it. That being cavalier can be very costly. And even being too loving sometimes can be, or what you think of as loving, that's not doing favors. So you have to be, I think we need to be willing to ride this out for the long term, whatever it looks like, and be willing to change, which is not Saturn. And Saturn might not like change, but, if it's going to be the Lord of, the end of one cycle and the beginning of the other, inherently there's some change metaphors in there. And Pluto is definitely about transformation. When one thing dies, what's reborn? That's the whole cycle of life, death, and rebirth that is so much a part of so many different spiritual paths. But Uranus is the planet of change. I think we need to figure out how to keep our feet on the earth. And I would even, just to promote the earth a little bit, say there's a lot to that. People going for walks and going and putting, your feet on the earth. And as summer comes, sitting even on the grass. What is it in general that keeps you grounded? That's something great about gardening and being a little more, not getting completely bent out of shape. It is a highly tumultuous time, but if you hang in there, you'll make it through. Most of us will. And there will be, and life will be different. So we have to adjust to those changes that come along. And I think the great thing individually is to really listen to our own souls that guides us. One of the things when I was doing a little extra research, there continues to be more and more planets, and there's other things with Neptune, the planet of the dream world. And I have a term in here somewhere, I wonder if I could find it in my notes, that people are reporting having very strange and difficult dreams. And it's something like the pandemic dream response or something like that. I don't know if I ought to keep digging through notes trying to find it, but there is a definite, people's dreams are giving them different messages right now, that it's almost like a PTSD thing. But I had a dream that was very much about the difference between the inner world and the outer world, that my inner world was doing one thing, but you need to handle something else, to deal with, the outer world. Anyway, trying to dance between what do I need to do to take care of my soul and what do I need to do to take care of things today.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and
I'm sorry, I'm going to go, because all of us have dreams that take years and years and years to manifest. And when is it's time to act on a dream? And you still need to get up and do what you need to do to take care of today, take care of whatever your daily life is. But it's so easy to forget the dream. But there's a whole metaphor of dreamers who are terrible about taking care of their daily life. So how do you balance those things where you take care of what you need to take care of? You stay grounded in the midst of this chaos and change, and yet be prepared, to come out of this stronger, maybe more rested, maybe with some project done, maybe, picking up the pieces and going on. We are a country born of pioneer stock. There's thousands. Of course, this is a global thing, but, in this country, and of course, there's all sorts of other political angles. But if you just take, the United States as a country, we're a pioneer country. We're people that mainly came giving up what was before, or maybe losing it, all sorts of things. People came with whatever and it was lost or stolen or something, and you come out of nothing. People can develop amazing lives out of, nothing. Even if people lost everything, something else would be reborn. And I don't think that's really what's going to happen. But there is the metaphor of, rising from the ashes of whatever changes. It's like the big question is, what are we becoming, and how can we build better structures? Because there are things that survive and endure, and I think we're really, one of the gifts of this time is seeing the things that are not endure. I'm going to have trouble saying that, but that don't endure. And what are those things that we can build that are sustainable personally and collectively?
Oh, totally. I love that, Elizabeth. And interesting aspect of dreams. And here at Intuitive School, by the way, we do offer dream courses. We have a dream book called Naked and Public Dream Symbols Revealed. So if anybody needs help trying to figure out their dreams, do contact us about that. But Elizabeth, I wanted to bring in, one of the things I love about astrology is that we can go back to any point in history and see what was happening and what the astrological, planetary situations were. And so if we go back, the last time where Saturn was in conjunction with Pluto, that takes us back roughly 35 to 38 years, which is at the beginning of World War I and the end of World War II. So that obviously was, Pluto is the underworld, can often relate to war. And I think in some ways we may not be experiencing a battlefield war, but I think we are experiencing a war of ideology, a war of different beliefs that's, caused a schism within various groups within this world as well as globally. I think it's increasing the war between different ideas and who wants bigger government, who wants smaller government, who believes in Western medicine, who believes in other natural remedies. That, to me, I see is the war that's going on.
I am a big lover of PBS. And here a while back, and I've been talking about this Pluto-Saturn thing for a few years now, and there was a show on about Downton Abbey. Now, I've never watched that show, but they had then come out with a movie. I know a lot of people loved it, and this was a nice review of the whole show, plus, hints at the movie. But it was so interesting when they started talking about it, because it was exactly at this time, the beginning of World War I is about the time period, and they had the cholera epidemic on there. Now, we don't have the Titanic sinking, but if we want to talk about patriarchal hubris, this is the unthinkable ship. This can't happen. We're so big and so powerful. I'm going to just plow through an iceberg, and then it's one of the big disasters of the day. And so even though we don't have that same metaphor, that kind of thinking was, when did people get too caught up in thinking they're all powerful? And of course, the stories of myths are filled with when people think they get too powerful and aren't balancing it with the spiritual. And there's a whole series of things that were happening around 2019-ish, when this was going on before. And also, when you get to the end of World War II, we have issues like the bomb, things, destruction and things like that. And one other interesting PBS thing, because, 1980, when this was, or in the early 80s, when this was happening again, it's a little harder to say exactly, except, and I say this with all due respect, I really do not like getting into, I, of course, have my very firm own political beliefs, but I try very hard to get along with people of all walks of life. But we did have a president who was mainly known from being on TV at that time, and which is an interesting thing, that they're very well known because of television. Of course, they're different in many, many ways. But I was watching another PBS special that was called Voices of the Women's Movement. And so, there's also at the halfway marker, like 9/11 was where it was I hope I'm saying this right. Every once in a while you want to double check things, but a Pluto-Saturn opposition, not a conjunction. But there were people in the 60s who were really fighting for a bunch of freedom. And they were saying that by the 80s, they thought they'd done all this good, and there was all this backlash of not having made any of the progress. And I see that now, all sorts of social issues that you really thought for most of my adult life that we've made some genuine progress. And it's like, oh my God, you'd think we hadn't had any social movement forward at all, and a huge push back on those things. But I think that, one of the things you can do is not give up the fight. So it's not like, and Mars, by the way, is going through and retrograding back over these things. So the god of war is playing strong in this. Another thing playing very strong, we had talked about, there's a now dwarf planet, and I'm not going to get into all of it, but, we've kind of added, while Pluto got demoted, there's a handful of other things called dwarf planets, and there's one called Eris. And she is the goddess of discord, and she's in a very challenging place to this. And there's an interesting article on Stephen Forrest's website where he thinks that Eris that's really causing, a lot of the trouble with this. And she's the goddess of discord who started the Trojan War. She wasn't invited to this one event and tossed the challenge, and one thing leads to the next, and it's a myth you can read. But, she causes all sorts of disruption. And there's little tiny things, like there's thousands and thousands of asteroids out in our solar system, many of them named. And sometimes it's just, sometimes it's named after popular goddesses or different figures. And I even saw when I was looking, get an asteroid named after you. But, there is an asteroid Wuhan. And I saw something on that came out with Demetra George, who was one of the great teachers, astrological teachers of the asteroids. One of the people she's connected with did a very interesting study on how the asteroid Wuhan is going through all of this. And like, who would even think that symbolism, is so far out there? But, there's so many different ways you can look at the angles on these things. Let me cycle back. I know we're winding down. Did I answer the question you asked?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to look back in history. And I also, you can continue on with that, but I want to bring up the fact that the Jupiter Saturn conjunction also occurred 20 years ago, and it will be for the next U.S. presidential election. I don't happen to know, but do you happen to know 20 years ago what event that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was relating to?
I'd have to look. I do know that all of, like some of, like the Kennedy assassination, and if you look further back, different presidents that have died have been involved in this thing. But see, by the time Reagan came along, it was going out of one element and another, and medicine had kind of changed. And even though there was an assassination attempt, it didn't work. And, you have to, I will say, though, that even though things are kind of changing, it really makes for a very interesting, if you want to be politically correct, probably very turbulent. All elections can be kind of, feisty, but this is a very interesting time looking at what goes. This is a very difficult year. There's some years that you do predictions and you're thinking, well, there really aren't that big of events. You can look to the little things, and you can always look to, relatively minor events. And then every once in a while, there's bigger things. But this is back to back, really profoundly challenging year, and it kind of culminates. I think it's the day after Christmas. There's the some things like the Jupiter, the Pluto Saturn thing. It was just one hit, and on that day, the exact conjunction was January 12th of this year, and the next day was a Monday, and we have our regular astrology meeting on the second Monday. So I was saying to somebody, has anybody really noticed anything? And there were the fires going on in Australia then. There were some things like that. And even though the virus had begun, we didn't know it had begun. So right then, you didn't know what's going on. So this is like the aftermath. But the Jupiter-Pluto thing is going back and forth. So we're experiencing that quite a bit over the course of this whole year. Now, Jupiter-Pluto together can bring great wealth. It's a very common thing. It can be really good. And Jupiter, did I say this already? It is mainly considered a good thing. But really what it is expansive. So it can go from really, really good to really, really bad. And I think you had talked about some famous people who have a lot of power. Do we have time for you to comment on some of the people of power who are using it in different ways?
Well, sure. Yeah. Well, Warren Buffett on his natal chart has the Jupiter conjunct Pluto, which would explain his great wealth. Also, Bill Gates on his natal chart has the Jupiter Pluto conjunction. So he's, obviously using this situation to increase his power because he's up here talking about the pandemic and that he's formulating some big vaccine and wanting to microchip people with it. And so he is obviously trying to extend his power because he's not a medical doctor. He's not a scientist. And so people are asking, why is this ex-Microsoft guy up here dealing with this pandemic? He doesn't have anything to do with it. Well, he's obviously seeing this as an opportunity for him to increase Jupiter, his power, Pluto. And I don't think it's going to work out too well for him because all his, shadow stuff is coming out. People are seeing some of the things that he's been into, which are not the best. So that's something that's going on. And I don't know how that's going to play out in the end, but I would also say that, with Jupiter Saturn conjunction, which will be coinciding with the U.S. presidential election on the good side of that, because Saturn kind of is going to reel in Jupiter. So the way I see it is, if these presidential hopefuls are up there boasting and exaggerating, with the Jupiter influence about all the great thing they've done, I think Saturn is going to reel that in and have them get real specific and disciplined, and people will be calling them on their stuff saying, whoa, wait a minute, So that could be a positive thing, I think, in terms of the presidential election.
One thing I want to say, because I know we're getting to the end here, is that a lot of this harkens to the negative patriarchy and the negative, hidden, secretive things that can be very Scorpio, which is related to Pluto imagery. But the good things related to it are, the typically rejected feminine things are being very emotional versus the logical, being very intuitive, being very emotional rather than, thought focused and rising above emotion. So there's this passion and intuition and wisdom and emotion. And it is made for a lot of people who don't know how to be in touch with their own souls. And each of us has, our own connection with the divine, with our soul. And if we can learn to balance whatever's going on in the world, and probably on some level, we do need to recognize that we're all connected. Now, how that's going to play out, and there's good ways that can play out and bad ways that can play out, and things in between. But the balance that we need is to really balance whatever grand work we do in the outer world with really a profound connection to our own guidance, which listens to the littlest decisions we need to make to the grandest things we can be helped with.
All right. Thanks for joining us today. That's all we have.